What is the role of humor in human life? As with everything else, we can say it's an evolutionary response. But a response to what exactly? For this, we may ask, how would human life look without humor? Or how would it look if all humans were laughing all the time? Then we can understand what function it plays as a biological behavior. We laugh, ideally, every day. But why and about what do we laugh? The question why concerns biology, and the question about what concerns psychology. But as with every matter, philosophy speculated about it even before biology or psychology were established sciences. Understanding these questions clarifies the importance of humor in all human affairs. In the practical world, I mean not in the morally ideal one important thing to prosper in society is charisma. And that is not about flattering other people. Charismatic people are those who make you feel good. And above all those things that make a company provides us with that positive feeling is humor. In business and politics, it is the same. Humor buys trust. Understanding this also makes you see all humor situations differently. You can detect a type of formula in all of them. It also makes you value the ingenuity of all those comedians who can drive discourse into unexpected paths. This requires a lot of creativity, since in comedy, as in many activities, for example music, formulas and cliches tend to take over creative processes and thus become predictable. Also, another interesting thing that comes to the surface is the relation between humor and philosophy. Most of the time, humor makes a statement about some issue on some level of human experience. The difference is that it uses a sort of flawless logic, accidentally humorous or intended for the purpose of laughter. So, what makes us laugh? One of the first speculations on this topic was the superiority theory, which says that the cause of laughter is feeling of superiority. Then was the relief theory, which states that it is the release of nervous energy. But a more interesting and accurate one was the incongruity theory, developed in the 18th century. This theory says that the cause of laughter is the perception of something incongruous, something that violates our mental patterns and expectations. This approach was taken by James Beattie, Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, Soren Kierkegaard, and many later philosophers and psychologists. It is now the dominant theory of humor in philosophy and psychology. Although Aristotle did not use the term incongruity, he hints that it is the basis for at least some humor. In the Rhetoric, a handbook for speakers, he says that one way for a speaker to get a laugh is to create an expectation in the audience and then violate it. Cicero, in The Orator, says that the most common kind of joke is that in which we expect one thing and another is said. Here, our own disappointed expectation makes us laugh. But as I already said, those questions concern psychology, not philosophy. In this regard, philosophy should instead ask, in what way can humor provide meaning to human life? I see it as necessary for well-being. Some say art is going to save us. Save us from what? Maybe they're referring to human suffering, or to saving us from the tragedy of a meaningless life. In that regard, we can see the decline of art into money laundering or mere entertainment in the best case. And entertainment is nowadays a form of fulfilling the emptiness experienced by many. That is reflected in the lucrativeness of the industry. I believe, instead, that actually only dark humor can save us. That is because human life is full of unexpected events, from little things not going the way planned to trying to find meaning and finding nothingness. We are destined to disappear, not only as individuals, but the whole earth and even the sun. We have little reason to take most things too seriously. Also, most of the time, It's in the worst moments when we need a laugh. Of course, with nonsense, not as a desperate search for relief or as a desperate attempt to try to enjoy even disgrace, but as a rational response to harmful, unexpected events. It helps us to address those things in a more, let's say, philosophical way, meaning a more reflective one. And that is because, in the wider scheme of things, we humans are not a serious thing. We are even ridiculous most of the time. In the face of the absurdity that being human implies, we can laugh. Not in a mad way, but in an intelligent one. An example of a good combination of philosophy and comedy is, of course, the work of Ricky Gervais. And it is no surprise, since he is actually a philosopher. But getting back to the point, although psychology is not developed enough, we can accept, at least provisionally, what it says, that we can address or explain to ourselves in very different ways the same situation. About that, we can categorize in a very ambiguous way that there are some people that tend toward drama and others toward humor. Dramatic people may even turn a comic situation into a tragic one, and vice versa. The violation of our expectations is at the heart of the tragic as well as the comic, Kierkegaard says. To contrast the two, he appeals to Aristotle's definition of the comic in chapter 5 of the Poetics. The ridiculous is a mistake or unseemliness that is not painful or destructive. The tragic and the comic are the same, insofar as both are based on contradiction. But the tragic is the suffering contradiction, the comical, the painless contradiction. The comic apprehension evokes the contradiction or makes it manifest by having in mind the way out, which is why the contradiction is painless. The tragic apprehension sees the contradiction and despairs of a way out. A few decades earlier, William Hazlitt contrasted the tragic and the comic this way in his essay on wit and humor. Man is the only animal that laughs and weeps, for he is the only animal that is struck with the difference between what things are and what they ought to be. We weep at what thwarts or exceeds our desires in serious matters. We laugh at what only disappoint our expectations in trifles. To explain the nature of laughter and tears is to account for the condition of human life, for it is in a manner compounded of the two. It is a tragedy or a comedy, sad or merry, as it happens. Tears may be considered as the natural and involuntary resource of the mind overcome by some sudden and violent emotion, before it has had time to reconcile its feelings to the change of circumstances, while laughter may be defined to be the same sort of convulsive and involuntary movement occasioned by mere surprise or contrast, in the absence of any more serious emotion, before it has time to reconcile its belief to contrary appearances. The core meaning of incongruity in various versions of the incongruity theory, then, is that something or event we perceive or think about violates our standard mental patterns and normal expectations. But illogic is not enough to be comic, so what else? Humorous amusement is not just any response to incongruity, but a way of enjoying incongruity. It is interesting to note how something that provides joy has been criticized so much. Incongruity theory did not improve philosophers' opinions of humor much in the 19th and 20th centuries. If humor is enjoying the violation of our mental patterns and expectations, then it is irrational. This irrationality objection is almost as old as the incongruity theory, and is implicit in Kant's claim that the pleasure of laughter is only physical and not intellectual. How could a delusive expectation gratify? He asks. According to Kant, humor feels good in spite of, not because of, the way it frustrates our desires to understand. George Santayana agreed, arguing that incongruity itself could not be enjoyed. But of course, they are, at least in part, wrong. Humor, although not all kinds of humor, is an intellectual endeavor, one of a logical type, that instead of seeking good reasoning, seeks absurdity, and more precisely, a particular type of absurdity. As a form of discourse, it is not very useful in exact matters, but it is useful in identifying contradictions and limitations in moral affairs, where the behavior of the object of study is more unpredictable, as is addressed in a stand up comedy. And it may also be useful at the edges of some arguments in epistemology or other more serious topics where things turn bizarre. But the critique advances in these terms. We have a prosaic background of common sense and everyday reality. Upon this background, an unexpected idea suddenly impines. But the thing is a futility. The comic accident falsifies the nature before us, starts a wrong analogy in the mind, a suggestion that cannot be carried out. In a word, we are in the presence of an absurdity, and man, being a rational animal, can like absurdity no better than he can like hunger or cold. All of this supposes some moral judgments about the good and the bad. Why would absurdity be bad? The critique states that humor undermines reason. But maybe it is when reason is of no help that humor is. That is, in many human affairs, so we enjoy becoming able to appreciate the nonsense of things. It is a mere survival instinct, which means not that enjoying is what gives meaning to life, but merely that absurdity and minor unforeseen events are enjoyable. We humans are animals that, as a survival behavior in a dangerous environment, make a lot of predictions and expectations. And when something that seems serious ends up not being as expected, then we find relief. And if furthermore it results absurd, we find it enjoyable or funny. Maybe other animals do not laugh because they lack the capacity not of surprise over a wrong expectation, but of finding it absurd. They may be able to expect, but not with the clarity and scope that humans do. But Kant may have reason in something. Not taking anything seriously may turn us into rational beings who do not seek knowledge and instead seek fun and entertainment. It's a matter of not falling into extremes, of finding balance. One of the few to classify humor as play and see value in the mental side of humor was Thomas Aquinas. He followed the lead of Aristotle, who said in the Nicomachean Ethics that life includes rest as well as activity, and in this is included leisure and amusement. In his Summa Theologiae, Aquinas extends Aristotle's ideas in three articles: whether there can be virtue in actions done in play, the sin of playing too much, and the sin of playing too little. He agrees with Aristotle that humor and other forms of play provide occasional rest. As bodily tiredness is eased by resting the body, so psychological tiredness is eased by resting the soul. Pleasure is rest for the soul, and therefore the remedy for weariness of soul lies in slackening the tension of mental study and taking some pleasure. Those words and deeds in which nothing is sought beyond the soul's pleasure are called playful or humorous, and it is necessary to make use of them at times for solace of soul. Okay. Beyond providing rest for the soul, Aquinas suggests that humor has social benefits. Extending the meaning of Aristotle's eutrapelia, he talks about a eutrapelos, a pleasant person with a happy cast of mind who gives his words and deeds a cheerful turn. Someone who is never playful or humorous, Aquinas says, is acting against reason, and so is guilty of a vice. In the last century, an early play theory of humor was developed by Max Eastman. In humor and play generally, according to Eastman, we take a disinterested attitude toward something that could instead be treated seriously. In the late 20th century, Ted Cohen wrote about the social benefits of joke telling, and many psychologists confirm Aquinas' assessment of humor as virtuous. A chapter in the American Psychological Association's Character, Strengths and Virtues, a handbook and classification, under a strength of transcendence is humor, playfulness. Engaging in humor can foster a tolerance for ambiguity and diversity and promote creative problem solving. It can serve as a social lubricant, engendering trust and reducing conflict. In communications that tend to evoke negative emotions, announcing bad news, apologizing, complaining, warning, criticizing, humor can provide a light that reduces or even blocks negative emotions. Consider this paragraph from a debt collector letter. We appreciate your business, but please give us a break. Your account is overdue 10 months. That means we've carried you longer than your mother did. So, from the biological perspective, laughter seems to be beneficial for health and overall well being, not only psychologically or physically, but also socially. In the last decade, thinkers in evolutionary psychology have extended Ben Hoff's work, relating humor to such things as sexual selection. In the competition for women to mate with, early men may have engaged in humor to show their intelligence, cleverness, adaptability, and desire to pleasure others. With all, this seems to me a very ambiguous and immature thesis. A more accurate explanation that attaches humor to reason is that part of rationality is thinking abstractly, in a way that is not tied to one's immediate experience and individual perspective. If at a dinner party I spill a blob of ketchup on my shirt that looks like a bullet hole, I could be locked into a here, now, me practical mode in which I think only about myself and my soul shirt. Or I could think about embarrassing moments like this as experienced by millions of people over the centuries. In the lower animals, mental processing is not abstract but tied to present experience, needs, and opportunities. It is about nearby predators, food, mates, etc. When something violates their expectations, especially something involving a potential or actual loss, their typical reaction is fear, anger, disgust, or sadness. These emotions evolved in mammals and were useful for millions of years because they motivate adaptive behavior, such as fighting, fleeing, avoiding noxious substances, withdrawing from activity, and avoiding similar situations in the future. Fear, anger, disgust, and sadness are still sometimes adaptive in humans. A snarling dog scares us, for example, and we move away quickly, avoiding a nasty bite. We scream and poke the eyes of a mugger, and he runs off. But if human mental development had not gone beyond such emotions, with their here, now, me practical focus, we would not have become rational animals. What early humans needed was a way to react to the violation of their expectations that transcended their immediate experience and their individual perspective. Humorous amusement provided that. In the humorous frame of mind, we experience, think about, or even create something that violates our understanding of how things are supposed to be. But we suspend the personal, practical concerns that lead to negative emotions and enjoy the oddness of what is occurring. The non practical attitude in humor would not be beneficial, of course, if I were in imminent danger. If instead of ketchup I spill sulfuric acid on my shirt, the here now me practical narrow focus of fear would be preferable to the disengaged, playful attitude of humor. When immediate action is called for, humor is no substitute. But in many situations where our expectations are violated, no action will help. In the Poetics, Aristotle said that what is funny is a mistake or unseemliness that is not painful or destructive. But people have joked about problems as grave as their own impending death. As he approached the gallows, Thomas More asked the executioner, "Could you help me up? I'll be able to get down by myself." On his deathbed, the story goes, Oscar Wilde said, "This wallpaper is atrocious. One of us has to go." Not only does such joking foster irrationality and provide pleasure, but it reduces or eliminates the combination of fear and or anger called stress, which is at epidemic levels in the industrialized world. In fear and anger, chemicals such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol are released into the blood, causing an increase in muscle tension, heart rate, and blood pressure, and a suspension of the immune system. Those physiological changes evolved in earlier mammals as a way to energize them to fight or flee, and in early humans they were usually responses to physical dangers such as predators or enemies. Today, however, our bodies and brains react in the same way to problems that are not physically threatening, such as overbearing bosses and work deadlines. The increased muscle tension, the spike in blood pressure, and other changes in stress not only do not help us with such problems, but cause new ones such as headaches, heart attacks, and cancer. When in potentially stressful situations we shift to the play mode of humor, our heart rate, blood pressure, and muscle tension decrease, as do levels of epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Laughter also increases pain tolerance and boosts the activity of the immune system, which stress suppresses. While there is only a speculation about how humor developed in early humans, we know that by the late 6th century BCE, the Greeks had institutionalized it in the ritual known as comedy, and that it was performed with a contrasting dramatic form known as tragedy. Here we return to humor as a source of meaning in human life. Both tragedy and comedy were based on the violation of mental patterns and expectations, and in both, the world is a tangle of conflicting systems where humans lived in the shadow of failure, folly, and death. Like tragedy, comedy represents life as full of tension, danger, and a struggle, with success or failure often depending on chance factors. Where they differ is in the responses of the lead characters to life's incongruities. Identifying with these characters, audiences at comedies and tragedies have contrasting responses to events in the dramas. And because these responses carry over to similar situations in life, comedy and tragedy embody contrasting responses to the incongruities in life. Tragedy valorizes serious, emotional engagement with life's problems, even a struggle to the death. Along with epic, it is part of the Western heroic tradition that extols ideals, the willingness to fight for them, and honor. The tragic ethos is linked to patriarchy and militarism. Most of its heroes are kings and conquerors, and it valorizes what Conrad Hayers calls warrior virtues: blind obedience, the willingness to kill or die on command, unquestioning loyalty, single mindedness, resoluteness of purpose, and pride. Comedy, by contrast, embodies an anti heroic, pragmatic attitude toward life's incongruities. From Aristophanes' Lysistrata to Charles Chaplin, the Great Dictator, to Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, comedy has mocked the irrationality of militarism and the blind respect for authority. Its own methods of handling conflict include deal making, trickery, getting an enemy drunk, and running away. As the Irish saying goes, you're only a coward for a moment, but you're dead the rest of your life. In place of warrior virtues, it extols critical thinking, cleverness, adaptability, and an appreciation of physical pleasures like eating, drinking, and sex. Humor makes us healthier and more rational in daily affairs. While tragic heroes are emotionally engaged with their problems, comic protagonists show emotional disengagement. They think rather than feel their way through difficulties. By presenting such characters as role models, comedy has implicitly valorized the benefits of humor that are now being empirically verified, such as that it is psychologically and physically healthy, it fosters mental flexibility, and it serves as a social lubricant. Finally, I'll point out some fascinating affinities between comedy and philosophy, because all this was a sort of philosophy of humor, but it also reveals that both are about transforming how we see and interpret things, in this case mainly moral and social affairs, both relying on reason, but with very different outputs. In this sense, we can also make comedy of philosophy, maybe mocking the attempt of philosophers to grasp the whole from its meaningless position in the universe. This is what Albert Camus intended, but in a serious way, which in the end results, ironically, in absurdity itself, stating a dogmatic resignation to the endeavor of seeking knowledge. So, first of all, as they think about familiar experiences, both philosophers and comics step back emotionally from them. Henry Bergson spoke of the momentary anesthesia of the heart in laughter. Emotional disengagement long ago became a meaning of philosophical, rational, sensibly composed, calm, as in a difficult situation. Philosophers and stand up comics think critically. They ask whether familiar ideas make sense, and they refuse to defer to authority and tradition. It was for his critical thinking that Socrates was executed. So were the cabaret comics in the 1930s Germany, who mocked at the Third Reich. The pleasure of stand up comedy is often like the pleasure of doing philosophy. In both, we relish new ways of looking at things and delight in surprising thoughts. Cleverness is prized. William James said that philosophy sees the familiar as if it were strange, and the strange as if it were familiar. The same is true of stand up comedy. Simon Critchley has written that both ask us to look at the things as if you had just landed from another planet. One 20th century philosopher attuned to the affinity between comedy and philosophy was Bertrand Russell. The point of philosophy, he said, is to start with something so simple as not to seem worth stating, and to end with something so paradoxical that no one will believe it. In the middle of an argument, he once observed, "This seems plainly absurd, but whoever wishes to become a philosopher must learn not to be frightened by absurdities." Often writing for popular audiences, Russell had many quips that would fit nicely into a comedy routine. The fundamental cause of trouble is that in modern world, the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. Most people would die sooner than think. In fact, they do so. Man is a rational animal, at least I have been told. Throughout a long life, I have looked diligently for evidence in favor of this statement, but so far, I have not had the good fortune to come across it, though I have searched in many countries spread over 3 continents.